Vernon, the heating and cooling specialist.
The name says it all. When you focus solely on indoor comfort for 43 years, well, you get really good at it. Get your heating or cooling system tuned by a Vernon specialist today for only $69. Vernon's 60 to 90 minutes of meticulous system inspection guarantees energy savings, or the tune-up is free. Now that's a value. Go to VernonHeating.com.
VernonHeating.com.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
This is the story of Ellen Chaloner, a remarkable woman who many people in the racing world have never heard of, but who is now recognised as the pioneer of women's involvement in racehorse training in Britain. In 1886, Ellen became the first woman to be given a permit to train horses in Britain. A year after, in June 1887, Ellen trained a winner at the prestigious Royal Ascot. Ellen and members of her family are buried in 2 unmarked graves at Newmarket Cemetery, opposite the Rowley Mile racecourse. In this podcast, The Trailblazing Trainer, you will be hearing from 3 of her descendants, including former Irish champion jump jockey Charlie Swan, about a campaign to get a proper headstone for this remarkable lady who died in Newmarket in 1944, aged 98. I began by asking great-granddaughters Susie Wilks and Marietta Krikhaar what they knew about Ellen when they were growing up.
Yes, certainly by my mother. I mean, my mother, although she didn't see much of her in later years because she was abroad, but when they came home on leave, which was just before the war was the last time, you know, they used to go racing at Newmarket and go and see her. So I've always known of her history in the family.
All I knew was that my grandfather was a trainer, that he trained horses, and my father was a great horseman himself. And the first time I was aware of her was when Susie sent me a newspaper cutting.
And as for Charlie, I thought all his family were Irish.
That's right. Yeah, I think she's my great-great-grandmother. Yeah, no, because everybody thought I got my riding, I got it all from my father's side, but no, it's all from my mum's side, I think.
But everyone associates you with Ireland.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my parents are English, and they came over to Ireland in 1965, and I was born in Ireland in 1968. So you know, basically, all my family came from England.
And what did you know about Ellen when you were growing up?
I didn't know very much, actually. It's only in the last few years I've really found out more about her. Yeah.
So it's through Marietta that you found out more.
Yeah, and my mum and my dad. My dad had a few books about her as well. I think he had some sort of documentation about it as well. So he was showing me.
So why the campaign now, Susie? Ellen passed away on the 5th of March, 1944.
Well, really due to Marietta, because I have always held all the history of the Chaloner family. In the year 2000, I started sort of trying to do a bit more research into the family tree. And I've always sent Marietta any bits of paper or press cuttings or things that I had. And I knew that Ellen was in an unmarked grave in Newmarket because I've been there. They're all the family are sadly in unmarked graves in Newmarket Cemetery. And I think during lockdown, Marietta was going through all the bits of paper that I sent her, and she came to the conclusion that Ellen was an important part of racing history, and that it was very sad that she was lay in an unmarked grave in Newmarket. And she talked to me about it, and I said, I know, Marietta, and for years I've been meaning to do something about it. And so she took up the cudgels and has decided that it's something that should happen. And she has been the driving force behind it.
To have her grave marked, and she should be honoured with a special stone over her grave. And I thought it was pretty disgraceful that she's buried in an unmarked grave. It's shocking that her grave is just left unmarked. So I felt I had to do something about it.
Ellen was born in Middleham, Yorkshire on the 27th of December 1845. Co-author of The Heath and the Horse and racing historian Tim Cox talks about Ellen's racing background.
She was the daughter of John Osborne, who trained up in Yorkshire, and she was the sister of John Osborne Jr., who was a 12 times classic winning jockey, a significant jockey in late Victorian times. So she was steeped in racing history almost from birth.
How did Ellen become a trainer? I thought that Florence Nagel was regarded as the first female trainer following a court case which went to the Court of Appeal in 1966.
It's quite clear that Ellen Chaloner became a trainer in 1886 when her husband died. And she continued training for a short period, up to about 1894. It's not clear why she stopped, but there was a fire at Osborne House where she was training, and that seems to have precipitated her giving up the day-to-day job of training, but I'm sure she was still involved.
You said she trained at Osborne House. Who trains at Osborne House now in Newmarket?
Osborne House is the overflow yard for Heath House, which is where Sir Mark Prescott trains. So if you go to Osborne House stables, that is now Sir Mark's property. And the large house, which you see at the bottom of Warren Hill, is where Mrs. Chaloner lived. She did train for some significant owners, such as Mr. Tattersall, who had the sales company, and Matthew Dawson, who was the great trainer and a great supporter of Mrs. Chaloner. And he was a predecessor of Sir Mark at Heath House. So they're across the road from each other, but he did put horses with her.
And Matthew Dawson was a significant trainer of the time.
Matthew Dawson was the great trainer at Newmarket, training horses like St. Simon. He had Fred Archer as his stable jockey. So he is one of the great names of Newmarket training.
Newspaper reports say that aged 11, Ellen saw her first race when her brother Johnny Osborne Jr. won the 2,000 guineas at Newmarket, the winner Vedette being trained by her brother-in-law George Abdale. After getting married to Tom Chaloner, who rode for her father Johnny Osborne Sr., the family moved south to Newmarket. Tom was a leading jockey of the 1860s and 1870s, winning 10 classics, including the Derby on Macaroni in 1863. Macaroni was trained at Palace House Stables, home now of the National Horse Racing Museum. Dr. Esther Harper, who now works in research, funding and policy, completed a PhD on the history of horse racing when she was based at the National Horse Racing Museum between 2013 and 2017. Dr. Esther Harper explains what the permit Ellen was given by the Jockey Club meant in 1886.
It was written about, though, as a licence at the time. So basically, as from 1872, trainers who wished to use Jockey Club land to train their horses were required to apply for a licence. So any trainer who trained at Newmarket would therefore have had to obtain a licence and obey Jockey Club rules, not just at the racecourse, but also on the training grounds. And if you didn't play by the rules, then your trainer's license could be withdrawn. And so as the influence of the Jockey Club grew, eventually everyone who intended to train racehorses then needed to apply for a license, which then came into force in the very early 20th century.
But what was the world like for a woman in racing in the 19th century? Dr. Esther Harper confirmed that there is evidence that women were actively involved in the early part of the 19th century.
There are a number of reports about how women were involved in racing. So a really great example is the trainer John Day. We've got a report from 1840 that talks about the role that his mother played in his stables. So when John was away, she would actually supervise the lads and tell them what work the horses should do. And she also mixed all the medicines for the horses and would treat the ill horses as well. So if you think about that, that's actually quite a lot of responsibility and suggests that she was very knowledgeable, even though she didn't hold a trainer's license.
I also sought the opinion of two women trainers of the 21st century, 2017 Grand National winner Lucinda Russell and Newmarket-based Gay Kelleway, who, when a jockey, became the first woman to ride a winner at Royal Ascot in 1987. What did they imagine it would have been like at the end of the 19th century?
Well, I mean, it would be very, very different to what it's like now. I think training in itself was very different. But to be a woman, in those days, people did a lot of stuff under nom de plumes because they didn't want to admit to being a woman. So it would be very tough and very hard. And the other thing is, it was such a traditional sport and such a traditional way of life that breaking with the tradition and being a woman would be hard. I mean, dealing with staff and stuff, I think we're all very keen about equality now, but in those days they were very keen about inequality. So she would have faced very many challenges.
And she had 8 children as well.
I know, yes. I hope that she had a bit of help with them, but to have so many children is quite incredible. So she was obviously a very good organizer and coped with good things and bad things. She obviously was a very marvellous woman. It's a shame that she's not alive nowadays, that we could know what it was really like then.
No, I couldn't imagine. I knew what it was like in the 1980s, so I couldn't begin to imagine how difficult and stumbling blocks a woman would have had to be accepted as a racehorse trainer.
Newmarket must have been a very different place in the 1880s. Now known as the home of racing, I asked Tim what it was like in Newmarket when Ellen was training at Osborne House.
It was, I think, for 2 reasons. One, there were far fewer horses than there are now. It was an important racing centre, but the number of horses on the heath was probably of the order of 1,000 horses. Now we get 3,000 horses registered at Newmarket each year. So it was a much smaller place. It was obviously a country town surrounded by the Gallop. So racing dominated, but it wasn't the busy place that it is now.
Well, Dr. Esther Harper gave some valuable information about Ellen's training establishment, which was included in the 1891 census.
What's particularly interesting is the 1891 census. So in that census, her profession is listed as trainer of racehorses, and it provides a really interesting snapshot of who was working at Osborne House. So her 2 sons, George and Dick, and her daughter Mary Ellen are living with her at that time. And both of her sons are listed as groom/jockey. There's also a domestic servant, as well as 3 stablemen who are working there. And there's also 3 jockeys who are not related to her, but they're listed as being apprenticed to her. And so throughout the time that she was training, the number of horses at Osborne House varied slightly, but in 1893, we know that she had 17 horses there. So when you consider the number of people that reported to her and the number of horses that she was responsible for, it's actually quite a significant business that she was running.
Ellen's descendants, Marietta, Susie and Charlie, are all related to George, one of Ellen's 7 sons. George played a unique role in confirming her position as a woman trainer soon after she had started training. After winning a race for her at Hampton Court, a jockey objected on the basis that George could not be apprenticed to a woman. The objection was overruled by the stewards when a case was discovered of a boy being apprenticed to a woman plumber.
There's definitely a report of it almost at the time that it happened. And there's a report from that race about some disagreement around an apprentice's allowance. So I'm inclined to say that that's not, that there's pretty robust evidence that that occurred. However, already by kind of the 1920s, then the Jockey Club starts revising the rules. So whereas previously those rules never had a gender attached to them, they then start stipulating gender for jockeys and trainers, where previously no gender had been mentioned. So it's quite interesting to kind of think of that when we then look back at, so Florence Nagel and Nora Wilmot, who took the Jockey Club to court in their long-running battle to get a trainer's licence in the 1960s. But I mean, they've been fighting for that since the 1930s or even late 1920s onwards. And so basically they then found themselves not being able to have a trainer's licence because the Jockey Club said that it could only be open to men. But at the same time, we know that Ellen Chaloner was in effect a licensed trainer in as far as the Jockey Club required a licence to train on its land in the 1880s. The mood music definitely changed by sort of 1920 when then they start changing the rules so that they're stipulating that it can only be open to men training.
Research by Tim Cox has revealed that Ellen's 3-year-old filly Jersey Lily won the Triennial Stakes, now known as the Jersey Stakes, at Royal Ascot in 1887. Jersey Lily also ran unplaced in the Oaks and the Cambridgeshire Handicap in 1887. But what did Ellen do after she finished training in 1894?
The reports that I've read suggest that she was still quite active. She just wasn't training anymore. So in effect, she let her son take over training at Osborne House. And I mean, it's worth thinking, she was born in 46. So by the time that she steps back, she's already in her 50s. And it seems, she was still quite active in the sport. She was still owning horses. And she was clearly a regular fixture around Newmarket, whether it was at the sales or at the racecourse. She's clearly also a well-known and well-respected figure at the sales, and buyers would ask her opinion on yearlings or broodmares. So I think that kind of also suggests in terms of kind of a wider respect for her expertise.
She was a great character. She was very well known in Newmarket. I think everybody knew her. In later years, she was very deaf, and my mother said it was quite embarrassing because, if you met her, because she couldn't hear herself, she used to shout at you. Yeah, I think she was just Granny, but a very well-known Granny in her own field. Apparently, they had in her latter years at Newmarket on the racecourse, she was in a wheelchair in her latter years, and they built a plinth for her by the winning post so she could wheel her wheelchair up onto the plinth and watch the racing from there. I think she must have been an incredible character and a very strong lady.
Ellen Chaloner remained a regular racegoer at Newmarket into her 90s, before she died at Osborne House on the 5th of March 1944. Since the famous court case in 1966, when Florence Nagel and Nora Wilmot were given licences to train by the Jockey Club, the number of women trainers has risen to about 20%, based on figures in the 2021 Horses in Training publication. Steady but slow progress. Lucinda and Gay recalled their early days of training.
Yeah, so it was funny. I started in 1995, and I think in those days things were just starting to change very much for the better. It doesn't seem like yesterday, but actually I suppose it was 25 years ago. So I think some people, remarked upon being a woman and the differences and stuff. And I think I always thought it was a very positive thing. I thought it was nice to be a little bit different and to, I could talk about having a woman's touch and so on. But of course, when I started, I only had sort of 10 horses. So it wasn't at all like how we train now. But it wasn't too much of a problem. And certainly nowadays, there is no problem, no issue at all. And I think a lot of these things, when you talk about inequality, a lot of the time we're very lucky. I think all the sort of side issues have gone.
There was I think there was only like a dozen women trainers when I first started training. It was a bit of a novelty more than anything. And even now, there's not that many. I mean, women trainers stand out from the guys because there's a lot of very, very good women trainers. Very few. You can say there's a lot of poor quality of men trainers, but I don't see any poor qualities of women trainers. They really stand out in this day and age. But like I said, when I first started, there was very few.
And you also met Florence Nagel, the first licensed trainer in 1966.
Yes, I met Florence Nagel in the early 80s when I was riding as an apprentice. I was riding for a trainer that sadly doesn't train anymore, but I was on the favourite riding at Kempton in the Florence Nagel Stakes, and I had the pleasure of meeting her. Sadly, I think I finished second, and Alison Harper won the race. But it was a pleasure to meet her, and she was She was the first woman to hold a license, and she was an amazing woman, very strong, great character.
She must have had to have been in the sort of 1960s.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think probably a little bit better than the 1800s, but I think it was pretty tough then.
An Ellen Chaloner Stakes at Newmarket would be something extra to celebrate this pioneering woman's achievement. Since the landmark court case, women trainers have won some major races. Jenny Pittman became the first woman to train the winner of the Grand National in 1983, a feat she repeated in 1995, and the Cheltenham Gold Cup in 1984, which she won again in 1991. Venetia Williams, Sue Smith, and our podcast guest, Lucinda Russell, have since won the world's most famous steeplechase at Aintree. Whilst in the 21st century, Henrietta Knight trained Best Mate to win 3 successive Cheltenham Gold Cups in 2002, 3 and 4. And in October 2021, the flat trainer Jane Chappell-Hyam, who like Gay is based in Newmarket, won the Group 1 Sun Chariot Stakes at the home of racing with her filly Saffron Beach. But there is no mistaking that Ellen Chaloner was the first woman trainer in 1886. Esther, how significant do you think that Ellen Chaloner is to the history of horse racing?
I think she's hugely significant, and it's quite interesting how she's largely been forgotten over time when she was clearly such a massive fixture in the world of Newmarket in the late 19th century. She was in many ways a pioneer, although perhaps we could also just say that she was formally recognised as a trainer when there were probably lots of daughters and wives of trainers who were also taking on quite a lot of responsibility in training yards at the same time. But it was Ellen who was really the first woman to hold a trainer's license in this country.
Well, it's she was the first female trainer, so it's fairly significant that way. Her husband died, so she got the license, and I think she was lucky to get the license because they wouldn't. I think it took a while for her to get granted the license because she was a female, and so she did make history.
And you'd be right behind a campaign to get her proper recognition.
Well, she is my great grandmother, so I would, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. We should have a headstone. Ellen Chaloner should be commended and have a headstone. Yes.
I hope this whole thing will bring about Ellen getting a bit of recognition for who she was. I know it was a very long time ago, but it's still quite a historical fact in the history of racing. And nobody, really very few people in the racing world have ever heard of her.
I think she deserves significantly more recognition than she gets. I know there's a campaign to have a headstone placed in Newmarket Cemetery. I think that campaign should be supported. It's not semi-worrying that an encyclopedia of British horse racing doesn't mention her, but concentrates on the court case in 1966. Racehorse training is not an easy profession. It's a small business that you have to run, and you're having to do it within strict rules. You're managing a small army of stable staff. You've got all the worry of looking after horses, getting them fit, getting them to the races. And for her to do that successfully and on her own, she was a widow. Her husband had died at a young age. She was about 40, just over 40, with 8. She did have 8 children that she had to bring up. So adding that all together, she does deserve the recognition. And I think she deserves more work to be done on her contribution to racing. She was an important figure at Newmarket. She can, as I said, she was born into a racing family. She considers herself to be part of the racing family right up to her death in the 1940s at a grand old age.
Stephen, I feel really strongly about my campaign that I've started. That is to place a gravestone on my famous great-grandmother, Ellen Chaloner, unmarked grave. She was an amazing woman, the first woman to be given a permit by the Jockey Club to train racehorses in 1886, and with success in a man's world. It's sad, I feel, that the British racing world has almost forgotten this famous woman. I now plan to make every effort to succeed in my campaign to honour her with a recognition for a stone to be placed on her grave.
If you would like to know more about the campaign, please contact Marietta at Marietta_CK@hotmail.com. That's Marietta spelt MARIETA_CK@hotmail.com. I hope you have all enjoyed this podcast, which has been made possible by the help of Ellen's great-granddaughters, Marietta and Susie, great-great-grandson, Charlie, Dr. Esther Harper, Tim Cox, Lucinda Russell, and Gay Kelleway. Intros and outros by Marguerite Webley.
Thank you for listening to The Paddock and the Pavilion. You can download the show on Apple Podcasts,
Amazon Music,
SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Spotify.
Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Pad and Pav. Don't forget, if you like the show, please do leave us a rating and review.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
'Tis the season for chicken fingers at Raising Cane's. Warm up with cooked-to-order chicken fingers, crispy crinkle-cut fries, Texas toast, and the real source of holiday magic, cane sauce. Happy holidays from Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers. One love.